Hi, this is Ron Cipcic. In this particular video, we're going to take a look at the science of economics. And so this is really an intro to the science of economics. And this is a great video to watch before you take your first economics course, be it principles of microeconomics or principles of macroeconomics or some other intro course to economics. First of all, what is the definition of economics? I mean, that's the place to begin. So economics defined, what is it? Economics is the study of how people could be individuals or large groups of people, nations. Economics is the study of how people make choices in a world of scarcity. And scarcity is the world we live in. Excuse me. We'll define scarcity in just a minute, actually try to get a clear idea of what that looks like. But let's just go back through this definition for a minute and emphasize some of the key ideas here. So it's the study of something. When we talk about the word study, we're really looking here at the word science. So economics is a science, and there are other ways to perceive reality other than science. One way would be, say, religion. You know, religion is a way to perceive reality. Science is another way to perceive reality. And by the way, I don't personally believe that religion and science necessarily contradict each other. Some people do. Some people believe that it's one or the other. I happen to believe that they actually are very complementary. That aside, economics is not a religious system, so it's not based on articles of faith. Economics is supposed to be based on the facts, and those facts need to be discovered through a process of inquiry. So economics is the study of something, and it's really the study of how people make choices. So if it's a study of how people make choices, it's really a behavioral science. And some people like to call it a social science, how people relate to each other. Not only how do people behave, but how do they relate to each other. And then another key idea in this definition is the idea that we live in a world of scarcity. And many people will make statements that I call are utopian statements. And they, the idea, for instance, you'll hear in advertising, you can have everything you want now. Well, that's propaganda. That's propaganda. You go, what do you mean it's propaganda? It's basically it's basically an attempt to manipulate you or to get you to think something, and it's not rooted in reality. So you can't have everything right now. First of all, you can't have everything. You're going to find in life that as you devote your time or money to different things, that time devoted to one thing is time not devoted to another thing. Money devoted to one thing is money not devoted to another thing. So the fact is you can't have everything. Your income is limited. The length of time you have on the planet is limited. So this idea that you can have everything now, and you put the word now into that little advertising jingle, you can have everything now even makes it more unrealistic. Why? Because you live in a world of scarcity. Okay? So economics is founded on the idea that you live in a world of scarcity. If there were no scarcity, there would be no need to study economics because economics is the study of scarcity. So if scarcity didn't exist, the science of economics would not exist. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's move on. What I want to do is I want now to connect scarcity, choice, and opportunity cost. If you live in a world of scarcity, you're going to have to make choices. And whenever you make a choice, you incur what we call an opportunity cost. So I'd like to lay that out for you right now. So what I'm going to do is erase this and start all over again. So we live in a world of limited resources. We know that. So the world we live in has limited resources. And the world we live in has people who seem to have unlimited needs. So the people who live in this world of limited resources seem to have unlimited needs, meaning when one need is satisfied, there's always a need waiting in line to take its place. It's very interesting that many things that start out as luxuries become necessities. The television set, I think, is a great example. When the television set was first introduced, I think it was in the late 40s and early 50s, this was a luxury item. Most households did not have a television set. Now, most households have at least two. And it's very unusual for someone to grow up not watching TV, at least in what we call the civilized world. Okay? So automobiles. At one time, automobiles were a luxury item. Most people did not have an automobile, let's say in the 1920s or the 1910s. Why? Because it was a luxury item that only the most wealthy, the horseless carriage is what an automobile was called. Most people had horse-drawn carriages in the year 1900 or the year 1910. Okay, so anyway, we live in a world of limited resources. We have unlimited needs. That's going to require us to make what are called choices, or what some people would like to call decisions. So economics is a study of how people make these choices, but the idea is that people have to make choices all the time. You're choosing to watch this video right now. The time you're spending watching this video is time not spent doing something else, perhaps looking at your smartphone. Hopefully you're not trying to do both. Let me just say, I believe it's impossible for people to multitask. It's just a way of doing lots of things in a mediocre fashion, in my estimation. So if you're paying attention to the phone, you're not paying attention to this video. If you're paying attention to the video, you're not paying attention to the phone. Your attention can only be devoted in one place at any point in time and space. So you're making a choice now to listen to my words and to look at this video. That is time not devoted to something else. Perhaps you've spent money to buy the device that you are watching this video on. Maybe you're watching it on a phone. Maybe you're watching it on a computer. Money spent on phones and computers is money not spent on other things. So you're making choices all the time. You're going to maybe eventually choose a mate. You're going to choose a mate in life. Time spent with one person, energy given to one person, energy given to one relationship is energy not given to other people. There's a lot of mythology around social media. You hear people say, I have 1,000 friends, and people like to boast about the number of so-called quote-unquote friends they have. But let's face it, you can't have 1,000 friends, at least as I define the word friend. A friend is somebody you enjoy doing things with, someone that you enjoy spending time with, somebody who you become emotionally connected with. And that's how I would define a friend. Usually, friendships are defined around a mutual interest. The point is, people can't have 1,000 friends because time spent with one person is clearly time not spent with other people. All right, so we live in a world of scarcity, and in this world of scarcity, we have to make choices all the time. And when we make choices, we incur what is called an opportunity cost. Opportunity cost. Now, this word is one of the more, I think, misunderstood terms in economics and really in the world. So let's go ahead and explain this or define this. An opportunity cost is the value, the opportunity cost is the value of what is given up when a choice is made. Now, many choices we make, you can't quantify the opportunity cost. In other words, you can't put it in necessarily dollars and cents. Let me give you an example. So let's say that you're watching this video, and the alternative to watching this video is you would be sleeping. So right now you're studying this video. Perhaps you're studying for one of Mr. Cipcic's classes. And the time you're spending watching this video is time you would otherwise be sleeping, because let's say you're watching this video at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning and you'd be sleeping right now. Well, what is the opportunity cost of you watching this video? I don't know yet how long this video will be. Let's say it's a 30-minute video. Well, 30 minutes devoted to watching this video is 30 minutes not spent sleeping. What is the opportunity cost of watching this video? It's not time. It's not the 30 minutes. It's the value of the sleep that is given up by making the choice to watch this video. You spend money on, let's say, a ball game. Okay, you go to see the Cubs play, or you go to see a movie. A movie that you're interested in. And time and money spent on a movie is time and money not spent on other things. The time spent at a movie is time not spent perhaps doing another activity. Well, it's the value of that alternative activity, which is the opportunity cost of attending the movie. It's the value of what you would have done with that $10 had you not spent it on the movie. Whatever the value is of that thing you would have bought had you not gone to the movie theater, that is the opportunity cost of you going to the movie theater. So in that you're devoting time and money to a movie, you're incurring an opportunity cost on two fronts. One, the money could have been spent on something else that provided you with value, and the time could have been spent on something else, another activity, which could have also given you value. Okay, so the key word, the operative word in this definition is value given up. It's value. You give up value. You don't give up time. You don't give up money. Time spent on something that is not very valuable is considered time wasted. Money spent on something that is not very valuable is considered money wasted. You'll hear people say, oh, that movie was a waste of time. Well, you can't waste time. You have a certain amount of it. You really don't have a lot of control over the amount of time you have. So whatever amount of time you have, you're going to try as a rational person, and we assume that about you, to spend it where it gives you the most value. So you're seeking to assign your time where it gives you the most value, which means you're always giving up other things that could have also given you value. Let's walk through an example here, and a simple example, and illustrate this idea. So I'm going to erase this, and let's keep moving here. So let's talk about a hypothetical meal. So maybe this is breakfast. And let's say the first column here are my options, and then here is the value of each option. Let me rewrite that. The value of each option, and then here's the price of each option. And if you're going to, generally, if you're going to, I say generally because I'm assuming you're rational, and I'm assuming you have good information, generally the value of an option will always be greater than the price, or you wouldn't consider buying it. If you subjectively value a meal at $20 and its price is $30, you would not buy that meal. You would say that meal isn't worth it. Isn't worth it? What do you mean? It isn't worth the $30. But no, it's not really worth the $30. It's how you could have spent the $30 on something else. So the value of something is subjective. That's subjective. That is very difficult to quantify. That is very personal. Values are based on a variety of things, and economists aren't interested in trying to explain why you have the values you have, why you like one food and somebody else doesn't, why you like to hang out with certain people and other people and you don't like to hang out with other people, why you dress a certain way and wear certain colors and certain styles, but refuse to wear other clothing and other styles. Okay, so let's say your breakfast option, you've got 3 breakfast options here, okay? And I'm thinking of a favorite restaurant that I go to here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a place called Wolfgang's. I'll put in a little advertisement for Wolfgang's. And one of my favorite items there, at least before I went on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, was one of my favorite options was the breakfast the breakfast burrito. And the breakfast burrito, I would pay as much as $20 for this breakfast. This breakfast is absolutely delicious. Now, at Wolfgang's, you'd only have to pay $8 for this breakfast. So clearly, this is an option. I value this breakfast much more than I'd have to pay for it. My second favorite option might be something like, maybe the Dewey. The Dewey. It's another breakfast combination. It has a bunch of ingredients in it, black beans and all sorts of things, eggs. And, I might pay $16 max for a Dewey, and I still only have to pay $8 for it. So it'd give me $16 of value, twice as much value as I'd have to pay for it. And the third breakfast item might be it's called the Vandermeer. It's named actually after somebody. And this is a great menu item at Wolfgang's, but I would only pay, let's say, $14 for this, and I only have to pay roughly $8 for that. So what you can see here is I've lined up my breakfast options on the basis of their value. And I'm assuming, just to simplify this, they're all priced at the same level. Now, obviously this presentation gets more complicated because real life is more complicated than this, because different things have different prices. So it's a little more complicated than this. But just for the sake of making the argument, let's assume that these are my three top options. There's an option 4, an option 5, an option 6, and so on. And these have values, and these also have prices. But what option would I buy first? What option would I buy? Assuming I only have $8, I only have enough room in my tummy for one breakfast, what option would I buy? Well, of course, I would buy the option that gives me the most value. So this is my optimal option. Why is this my optimal option? Because it gives me the most value. I am essentially a value seeker. I try to take my $8 and assign it where it gives me the most value. Okay? I try to assign it where it gives me the most value. Now the question is by spending my $8 here, I only have $8, what do I give up? Well, I can't have, let me just get red going here. I can't have the Dewey. Now the third option is out, and the fourth option is out because it's either my first or second option. If I buy the first option, breakfast burrito, I can't buy the second option. So really what I give up in buying the breakfast burrito is my next best alternative. $16 is actually my opportunity cost. Why? It's the value of what I've given up in making my choice. My choice is to buy the breakfast burrito. But my opportunity cost, the true cost of buying the breakfast burrito, is the value of the Dewey that I've given up. Okay? You see, people run through life again with their time and money, and they try to assign their time and money where it gives them the most value. So let me go ahead and erase this, and I'm going to show you something here. If you take, let's say, let me just write this, set up a little table here. This is benefit. This is cost. The choice, in this case, is buy the breakfast burrito. So that's my choice. What did I gain? What did I gain by doing this? I gained $20 of value. $20 of value by buying what? The breakfast burrito. What did I give up? What did I give up? I gave up $16 of value, which was the Dewey, the value of the Dewey. Was this a good choice? Was this a good choice? The answer is yes. Why? Because the benefit exceeded the cost. I made a choice where the benefit turned out to exceed the cost. So this process of weighing benefits versus cost is called marginal analysis. And when we study the behavior of people, we see them engaging in marginal analysis all the time. In fact, people are doing it all the time and hardly thinking about it. They're walking through life weighing, do I do this with my time or do I do this? They walk through life with their money. Do I do this with my money or do I do this with my money? The process of weighing benefits versus cost is called marginal analysis. So let me write this out. Weighing the benefits of a choice against the cost of that choice. And again, you got to be careful. The true cost is not money or time. So the price is not the true cost of the burrito. The true cost of the burrito is the value of the Dewey I gave up in making that choice. Okay? All right, so we've covered some very important concepts here. We've covered the definition of economics. We've talked about how, based on that definition, scarcity is related to choice making, and choice making is related to opportunity cost. And we also have described a very important way that people behave in that they engage in what we call marginal analysis, the weighing of benefits versus cost. Now, economics, this is a good place to talk maybe about the difference between micro and macroeconomics. Microeconomics is, let me just write this out. Microeconomics is the study of how people, in particular individuals, behave in a market setting. Now this is maybe a little bit restrictive because the decision to go to class or not is not in a market setting. That's an individual choice you make. But most of the time when we talk about microeconomics, we're talking about how people behave in a market setting. So the key word here is market setting. If we're looking at an individual market, say we're looking at the gasoline market, say that the price of gasoline decreases. So the price of gasoline decreases. How does that affect behaviors? Well, one effect might be that buyers buy more gasoline. So you'll see this model later on in the course because we're going to be talking about the law of demand. This is actually called the law of demand. Law of demand. The law of demand is a microeconomic principle. Why? Because we're looking at how an individual gasoline buyer or a group of gasoline buyers in the gasoline market behave when the price of gasoline drops. Now maybe the buyers of gasoline are relatively insensitive to price. So maybe a 50% decrease in price only causes them to buy 20% more gasoline. These buyers are relatively price insensitive. That's an empirical question. It's a scientific question. We would do research to see how sensitive gasoline buyers are to price changes. Some people make the argument that gasoline buyers are not price sensitive, that gasoline prices can go up 100% and they're still going to buy the same amount of gasoline. That's not actually what evidence shows. Of course, if you make that argument that gasoline prices could double and buyers aren't going to buy buy less, if the price doubles, buyers aren't going to buy less, you have to make the counter argument that if the price of gasoline is cut in half, they won't buy more. And that, of course, that's very unreasonable. What is more likely, in fact, what the evidence shows is that when gasoline prices go up a large percentage, gasoline sales go down, but they don't go down as much. And when gasoline prices drop a lot, gasoline sales don't increase by the same percentage or more. So, but the point in bringing this up here is that this is a micro question. The price of gasoline, even though people buy it all over the United States and all over the world, it's a particular market. It's a sub-market within an overall economy. The gasoline market is not the entire economy for the United States. Now, if you look at macroeconomics, let me go ahead and erase this. Macroeconomics, I got to spell it right, so let's try again. I'm having a little difficulty here. There we go. I can do this. Macroeconomics is the study of national choices and outcomes. So in the case of macroeconomics, what are we looking at? We're looking at national outcomes, national choices. So in other words, we're aggregating, putting together, totaling all of the behavior of all the people. So for instance, a macroeconomic issue would have to do with things like GDP. So if you look at the output of the United States in 1 year, that has a name. That's called GDP. The output of a nation, say the United States, in a 1 year time period is called GDP. This is the proverbial economic pie. Well, perhaps the government is undertaking policies. Maybe the government cuts taxes with the idea that by cutting taxes it can boost the size of GDP. Okay, so if we cut income taxes for all Americans, maybe the argument is GDP will expand. That, by the way, is called a hypothesis. And we'd have to see whether tax cuts of that variety actually boost GDP. We'd have to gather evidence of that. But the point is, that's a macroeconomic issue. Why? Because the tax cut is designed to have an effect on the overall economic pie. This is the pie that all Americans eat from. So cutting the excise tax on gasoline might cut the price of gasoline and might cause more people to buy gasoline. That is a micro question. But cutting income taxes for all Americans as so to boost economic activity, perhaps to get Americans to spend more and in the hope that that greater spending would lead to greater GDP, that is a macroeconomic question. So again, let me just rehearse this. Micro tends to focus on the individual, particularly the individual working within a particular market setting. Macroeconomics is a study of national outcomes, national choices, and these are going to be things that affect most, if not all, of a nation's citizens. Okay? And affect them in a substantive way. Okay? So that's how we distinguish those two branches of economics. All right, I'd like to wrap this up by talking very briefly. I've got a couple more things I want to talk about as long as I have you here. I want to talk about the 4 steps in the scientific method. So let me go ahead. We said right up front that economics is a science, and so it's important to take a minute and think about the scientific method. So I want to write out the 4 steps in the scientific method. So 4 steps in the scientific method. 4 steps in the scientific method. And then I want to give you an example here to help you kind of see this. So the first step in the scientific method is to identify identify the key variables to be studied. So say that we're interested in how gasoline prices affect gasoline sales. Well, what would be our two variables? If we're interested in how gasoline prices affect gasoline sales, we would be looking at the price of gasoline and the quantity demanded of gasoline. Those would be our two variables. And let me get rid of that bad S at the end there. I'm having trouble writing today. Just stick with me. So our two variables are the price of gasoline and the quantity demanded of gasoline. We're going to ignore all other variables. We're not interested in how the income of the buyers affect gasoline sales. We're not interested on people's perceptions of gasoline, whether they like to use carbon products or not, and how that affects their gasoline consumption. We're not looking at what we would call the taste and preference for gasoline. We're not looking at the price of gas-guzzling cars, which may affect how much gasoline is purchased. There's lots of variables that affect how much gasoline people buy, the price of gasoline only being one of many variables. So the first step in your scientific method is to identify the variables that you're going to study. Number two, you need to make assumptions. So when you begin to set up your study, what we call your model, you need to make what are called assumptions. Assumptions are basically they're designed to simplify. They simplify the model. The model is basically the theory or hypothesis. And I'll be talking about these two things in a minute. So an assumption is really something you take to be true. An assumption is something taken to be true and not tested. So for instance, let me give you a for instance here. A key assumption that we make in economics right off the top is that people are rational. So gasoline buyers are rational. People are not addicted to gasoline. Now they may have a strong preference for it, they may have a strong need for it, it may be a necessity, but people are rational. Rational people tend to behave a certain way. They don't buy things, for instance, that they know will hurt them. Okay? They generally will buy things that tend to help them. That doesn't mean that we don't take risks. We know that we can be hurt in driving a car. But on the other hand, we don't buy cars so we can crash them and kill ourselves. We buy cars because we believe they can safely get us around, conveniently and safely get us around. So we're assuming here that the buyer is rational. We're also making an assumption called ceteris paribus, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about ceteris paribus. Let me go ahead and erase this. I want to move to the next line. So we're still under number two, make assumptions. But one of the assumptions we're going to make is ceteris paribus. In other words, we're going to assume that all other factors affecting the quantity demanded of gas, we're looking at the quantity demanded of gas, all other factors affecting the quantity demanded of gas are being held constant. So as I said earlier, the incomes of gasoline buyers will affect how much gasoline they buy. As we relate the price of gasoline, as we try to relate the price of gasoline to the quantity demanded of gasoline, we are going to hold people's incomes of gasoline buyers, constant. So Y stands for income. And yes, the income of gasoline buyers affects how much gasoline they can buy. But in doing the research here, in doing the study of the relationship between gasoline and the price of gasoline and the quantity demanded of gasoline, we want to hold people's incomes constant. And there's ways to do that in our research. There's ways to hold income out of the analysis when we go to collect the data. Okay, and there's lots of other factors that affect people's purchases of gasoline. Again, I mentioned this earlier. Their preference of gasoline might be affected by their views of the environment and their either their willingness or unwillingness to use carbon-based products, which gasoline is. Okay, so there's lots and lots and lots of factors. I'll just use an etc. here that could affect ultimately the quantity of gasoline sold. We're only interested, if we're doing research on these two variables, we're only interested in these two variables. So we're going to be trying to hold all these other variables constant. This is called ceteris paribus. Okay? All right, so that's assumption 2. Let's keep going here. Got to move it along here. I don't want this video to be too long. Assumption 3 is formulate a hypothesis, or what we might call a theory. A theory is a hypothesis. So formulate a hypothesis. Now let me define the word hypothesis. A hypothesis, you'll hear people say, oh, a hypothesis is nothing more than an educated guess. That is not true. It's not a guess. It's not a guess. It's a statement as to how the variables are expected to relate. We're not guessing. We're going to go out and gather data. We're not just winging it. We're going to go out and gather data to try to prove what we believe is true. So that it's a statement as to how the variables are expected to relate. So for instance, let's go back to our gasoline example. Let's say that we believe that if there's an increase in the price of gasoline by 50%, that will decrease the quantity demanded of gasoline by, say, 20%. Okay, the hypothesis might be very general. We might just be very general and say an increase in the price of gasoline leads to a decrease in the quantity demanded of gasoline. That might be as far as we want to go with our research. Our research could even be more specific. We might want to prove that generally gasoline prices increase 2 to 1 concerning the absolute value change in the quantity demanded. So in this case, your buyers are very, very price insensitive. So maybe we're trying to not only prove that price and quantity demanded are inversely related, but we're trying to prove that the buyers are price insensitive. Okay, most people believe that buyers are price insensitive when it comes to gasoline. We're going to set up a hypothesis that tries to show that. Okay, now let me just say this. I'm going to say this again in a minute, but our goal is not to prove the hypothesis true. Science doesn't try to prove the hypothesis true. It either tries to prove the hypothesis false or not false. Not false is not true. So our goal will be to prove this either false, that this is false, this hypothesis is false, or to prove that it's not false. Not false means it might be true, but we're going to need further inquiry to know, repetitive experiments and more research to know whether this is in fact something that could be turned into what we would call an absolute, which would be truth. Truth is an absolute. It's not relative. So is this relationship true? That's very difficult to prove when you're only doing an experiment. Okay, you're only, you're sampling the data. So good scientists, this is a big idea, good scientists rarely say something is true or absolutely true. You don't even need the word absolutely in front of true. If it's true, it is absolutely true. What good scientists will say is the hypothesis proved it not false. In other words, the evidence said that it was not false, and we can walk further down the path of towards believing this is true. All right. Last step in the scientific method is to test the hypothesis. And in economics, remember, economics is a social science. Economics is a social science. We do not do controlled experiments for the most part. We study people, study behavior in the way of life. In other words, we don't lock people up in rooms, cages, and observe them. We may do this with rats, but we don't do it with humans. So humans have to be observed in their so-called natural environment. We have to collect data on them that, and in the process of observing them, we don't want to observe them in such a way that we actually affect their behavior. And that's one of the problems of studying human beings. When you observe them, and they know you're observing them, you may in fact actually affect their behavior. So the data we're going to be using here in economic theorizing is going to generally be data collected by the government or collected by businesses, and this is the sort of general data that businesses may collect on themselves or collect on each other, or the government may collect on businesses and government and consumers. And we're not putting people in artificial settings to study their behavior. Okay, so this usually is going to be just simply data collection, observing data that and processing data statistically that we're collecting. Okay, sometimes in economics there is experimentation, but in the social sciences this is very, very rare. And I'm not even going to talk about the types of experimenting that goes on in certain little areas of economics. Most economic testing is done using either government data or business data that is collected by these stakeholders to give them better information about what's going on with respect to the things they're watching. Okay, so let's go back through those. You're going to what? You're going to identify your key variables. You're going to what? Make the assumptions you need to make to simplify the problem and to get the problem focused on what you're going to look at. Step 3 is you're going to formulate a hypothesis, a statement as to how you think those variables are related. You're going to form a hypothesis, a statement as to how you think the variables are related. And then you're going to go out and gather data and test that hypothesis. And you're either going to prove it what? You're going to prove the hypothesis either what? False, or what? Or not false. These are your two options. Okay? All right. As long as I have you, there's one more subject I'd like to discuss, and then we'll wrap it up. Scientific statements are what are called positive statements. So a positive statement, remember, a hypothesis is a statement as to how the variables are related. Positive statements are scientific statements. Why? Because science is interested in looking at what is or what's happened, not looking at what should be. So a positive statement is a statement as to what has been or as to what is. So it's a statement about the past, this is the past, or it's a statement about what is the present. But it's positive statements are not statements about what we would like to see. They're not statements about trying to form a world that we would like to see. They're a statement about the world as it is. Okay, let me give you a for instance. So here's an example of a positive microeconomic statement. For example, the minimum wage in Michigan, the minimum wage in Michigan is, at the time of this writing, $10 per hour. This statement is a positive statement. It's factual. Positive statements are factual. You go, what do you mean factual? They can be tested. We can go out and gather data. In fact, it'd be very easy to do. We can just simply get on the state of Michigan's website, the government website, state of Michigan government website, and we can actually see what the minimum wage is in Michigan. It, by the way, is not $10 per hour. I think at the time of this writing, the time of this video, it's $8.40 per hour, $8.50 per hour, something like that. So this is a factual statement. This statement is false. Is it testable? Yes. Is it a scientific statement? Yes. Can it be tested? Yes. By the way, it's false. It's false. So positive statements can be false or not false. Now, contrast a positive statement with a normative statement. A normative statement is a statement as to what one would like to see. So it's not a statement about what is. It's not a statement about what has happened. It's a statement about what we would like to see in the future. Okay? So for instance, here's an example of a normative statement related to the minimum wage. The state of Michigan should increase the minimum wage to $15 per hour so as to boost the incomes of poor people. Okay, this statement is normative. Why is this normative? You go, well, I believe in this. You can believe in anything you want to believe in, but this statement is not a scientific statement. It's not a scientific statement. Doesn't mean it's not a statement that we could make and try to argue for, but you cannot argue this statement scientifically. Why? Because it's not a statement about what is, it's not a statement about what has happened, it's not a statement about reality as it is, it's a statement about what we would like to see reality look like. Notice the word that gives it away is the word should. It doesn't speak of what is or has been, it speaks of what we would like to see in the future. Now, some people will call this an opinion, yeah, but that's not the way, you know, if you wrote on one of my tests or exams, a normative statement is an opinion, I would not give you credit for that. Okay? You're right, though, opinions cannot be generally tested scientifically. You can use science to prove them, to make an argument for them, but you can't prove an opinion. You can't prove an opinion scientifically. Okay. Now, normative statements are going to often be called policy statements. So when you get into the realm of policy and politics, most of these statements are going to be normative because it's what we would like to see happen. That doesn't mean they're not valid. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't be pursued. It doesn't mean you might be able to make a very strong case for a $15 minimum wage per hour in Michigan. Or at least you might try. I'm not sure you could make a strong case, but you might want to try to make a case, and you might use evidence that you've gathered, research evidence that indicates that a higher minimum wage doesn't reduce employment, for instance, of particularly teenagers and disadvantaged individuals. Well, you can use science or what you think to be science to try to argue your normative statement, but by their very definition, normative statements are not scientific statements. Okay? And it's important to distinguish when you hear somebody saying something to learn to listen. Is that a normative statement or is that a positive statement? A lot of normative statements get dressed up. People try to dress them up as positive statements and make them try to sound like they're scientific facts when in fact they're not. Okay? Well, I hope you've enjoyed this brief, not as brief as I had originally hoped, but this brief exploration of the science of economics. These are some of the things you need to think about before you delve into microeconomics or macroeconomics. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's been helpful. I hope you will look in on some of my other videos.